Welcome to all of you. This is very exciting to meet together and delve into Zohar. Today is January 16th, 2019, and this is our first Zohar meeting on Zoom. There are actually over 300 people that have joined the class. A good number of them are planning to watch the video recordings afterward, but majority are participating in this live session. So welcome to all of you. I'd like to start with a simple prayer in Hebrew for studying Torah. V'ha'arevna Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'v'fi amcha Beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tze'etzaenu v'tze'etza'ei amcha Beit Yisrael kulana yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai hamalamed Torah la'amo Yisrael. May the words of Torah be sweet in our mouths and in the mouths of our children. Blessed are you, O God, who teaches Torah to the people of Israel, and through us to all of humanity. We're going to explore the Zohar, and tonight I want to speak briefly about the 10 sefirot, and then look at the first Zohar passage together. So many of you have the diagram of the sefirot either at the beginning of the book or as a separate PDF. And if you take a look at that now, I may show it on the screen occasionally, but I'll hope the people have it themselves. This is that diagram. So I'll just assume that people have this. It's at the beginning of the hard copy, the hardback of each volume of the Pritzker edition. And I've sent it to everyone as a PDF. So if not tonight, then for next time, please print it out. I think it'd be useful to have this in front of you as we talk about the different sefirot. The sefirot are aspects. The sefirot are aspects of the divine personality, you might say. The chart is at the very, very beginning of each volume. If you just look to the first page after the table of contents, you'll see the diagram. It's immediately after the contents. It's an unnumbered page, and you can't miss it if you start from the beginning of the book. The sefirot are aspects of God, and the question is really, what is the ultimate reality of God? If you look at that chart, it looks like this is a depiction of God, a picture of God, but that, of course, is really an impossible thing to say in a Jewish context. Next week, the Torah reading is going to be giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, the week after this. And there, of course, it says in one of the 10 Commandments not to make an image of God, not to bow down to any image. So how can the Kabbalists dare to depict God, dare to have a representation of God? What saves that from being a heretical statement is really the insight that the ultimate reality of God is Ein Sof. Okay, that beautiful phrase in Hebrew consisting of two words, Ein Sof, literally there is no end. It's the Hebrew word for infinite. That word was invented by the Kabbalists, but it entered Hebrew, and it's used in modern Hebrew not only by religious believers, but also by scientists and mathematicians in Israel. That's the normal Hebrew word for infinity, whatever type of infinity you're describing. But that term was created by the Kabbalists to refer to the unbounded nature of God. In other words, whatever we're going to say about the sefirot is simply one aspect of the divine. The ultimate reality is, you could say, the white space behind all of these different spheres, all of these different qualities of the divine. We're really going to explore the sefirot throughout the course, and much of what the Zohar does is to read the Torah as a code that is informing us about God's inner life. You could almost say that the Kabbalah reads the Bible as a biography of God. We think that the Torah is talking about Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah and the various biblical heroes, but for the Zohar, all of the human characters in the Bible are alluding to qualities of the divine. So please don't get too confused. The sefirot are a complex system. Many of you have started to read Arthur Green's introduction. I know some of you are waiting for that volume to arrive, volume 1. When it does, you can dip into Art Green's introduction and read a little bit each week, and he helps us to get a handle on the sefirot. What I want to do now is just to talk about the sefirot briefly, really to give us enough so that we can begin to read our first passage from the Zohar. We'll talk more about the Zohar itself in the coming sessions, but tonight I'd like us to focus on the sefirot briefly and then dip into the text itself. So if you're looking at that chart, or just have a mental image of that chart, at the top of the screen, I'll bring this up again here. At the top is that first sefirah, Keter, which means crown, and you could picture this as really an androgynous organism, an androgynous being, a crown on top of the head. The next two sefirot, Chokhmah meaning wisdom, bina meaning understanding, those are really the divine mind, the divine brain. And we have to remember with all of these sefirot, it's talking about divine qualities, but it's also talking about human qualities, because we are created in the image of God. And the challenge here really is to purify our own limbs, to purify our organs, so that we become a vessel for the divine shefa, for the divine flow. So this diagram of the sefirot is a human body and yet divine body at the same time. Okay, so Keter is on the head of the on top of the head. Chokhmah and Bina would constitute that head. Chesed and Gevurah, the next two sefirot, Chesed on the right and Gevurah on the left, would be the right and left arms of the divine body and of the human body. Tiferet, the trunk of the body or the heart. Netzach and Hod, the next two sefirot, Netzach on the right, meaning endurance. Hod on the left, splendor. Those would be the right and left legs. So Chesed and Gevurah, the right and left arms. Netzach and Hod, the right and left legs. Yesod, the divine phallus. And malchut, or Shekhinah, the last of the 10 sefirot, the divine feminine. Occasionally in the Zohar, specifically the female sexual organ, the vagina. So that's really a shocking graphic element of the sefirot. This is one of the reasons that perhaps the Kabbalah was kept secret, because it's describing very graphically divine physical nature and even divine sexuality and human sexuality. And once again, the sefirot are both human and divine at the same time. There's an interaction between us and God. We stimulate the divine life. The goal of the sefirot is to unite the masculine and the feminine, and that union cannot take place unless human beings stimulate the divine romance. Every good deed that a person performs, stimulates the divine union. Every evil deed or every mindless deed interrupts that union. So in that sense, God depends on us. And that's really one of the radical insights of the Kabbalah. You might say that there are three great radical contributions the Kabbalah makes. Two of them I mentioned already, and one I've alluded to. The first is that God is unbounded and infinite, nameless, ultimately, Ein Sof, the infinite. The second is that if we're going to talk about God, we have to balance the patriarchal depiction, which has dominated all of Western religion. We have to balance that with the feminine nature of God. And according to Kabbalah, God is equally male and female. One of those divine couples is Tiferet and Shekhinah. Tiferet in the middle, and Shekhinah, malchut. Right, that last sefirah, malchut, I'll be referring to her more as Shekhinah, the divine presence. So they are a divine couple. The union of Tiferet and Shekhinah is the union of the masculine and the feminine. But near the top of this ladder of sefirot, we have another male and female couple, and that is Chokhmah and Bina. Chokhmah on the right, the divine father, Bina on the left, the divine mother. And Bina really gives birth to the 7 lower sefirot. She is the source of all of those lower divine qualities. I want to give one example here of how these sefirot are both human and divine. If you look at the central triad, Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet. Okay, Chesed meaning divine love. Gevurah is its counterpart, divine judgment. Notice that its other name is Din, or judgment. So love and judgment here are seen as polar opposites within the divine and within the human psyche. Another name for Gevurah, which is not recorded here, is Pachad, fear. So think of love and fear as opposites. This is something I think we can all relate to. Loving and fearing. Often, sometimes the person you love is also someone you fear. Think of your spouse, your beloved, a person with whom you're so intimate, with whom you share love, and yet there's something scary, even terrifying, about baring yourself to another human being. So learning to balance love and fear, love and awe, is one of the challenges of that system. This is a human challenge and a divine challenge. If God acts toward the world just in love, then there's no accountability. If God acts just in judgment, then the world could be condemned or even destroyed. So ideally, there's a balance between the right and the left, between love and awe, love and fear, and that's represented by that middle sefirah, Tiferet. Yes, pachad. Pachad is the Hebrew word for fear, and that's another name for that sefirah on the left. We'll talk more about those each time, really. But tonight, the passage we're going to look at really focuses on bina and Shekhinah, bina and malchut. So let's talk for a minute about those, and then we can begin to look at the Zohar itself. Bina is near the top of the sefirot, but let's start at the very top. Of course, at the very ultimate top is Ein Sof, and we shouldn't think that Ein Sof is just at the top. Ein Sof is the infinite, the white space around everything. Ein Sof begins to emanate, begins to flow, begins to manifest itself, you could say, and the transition between Ein Sof and the Sefirot is represented by that first Sefirah, Keter. Keter we described as a crown on the divine head, but another name for it, I think its most beautiful name, is the Hebrew word ayin. This is spelled with an aleph, aleph, yud, nun, and that word means nothingness. It's really the same root as the word ein, as in Ein Sof. Ein means there is not, and ayin is the noun from that root. Ayin is nothingness. So the highest quality of the divine is referred to as nothingness. That does not mean a blank. It really doesn't mean what we think of as nothing. It's better understood and better pronounced as no thing, no thingness. You might say this is pure divine energy, the undifferentiated energy of God before it manifests in any particular way. So it's really Ein Sof making its transition to the manifestation of all of the subsequent sefirot. If Keter is no thingness, Chokhmah is the beginning. Chokhmah is the primordial point that flashes out of Keter. It's the first identifiable aspect of the divine, literally wisdom, but described as beginning. Why isn't Keter the beginning? Because Keter is eternally there. Chokhmah is the first sefirah that really emerges at a certain point. So even though it's sefirah number 2, it's called Reshit, the beginning. That primordial point of Chokhmah expands into a circle, which becomes the next sefirah, bina. If Chokhmah is a point, bina is a circle, also pictured as the womb, the Divine Mother and the womb. So Chokhmah is the seed that's planted in the womb, and bina then gives birth to the lower sefirot. Bina is also known as palace, and one of her divine names is Elohim. We'll come across that name tonight in the passage. Chokhmah, the point, and bina, Elohim. If Keter is facing us, Chokhmah is its left hand. Chokhmah is considered the right, but for Chokhmah to be on the right, you might say that we're seeing only the back of God. Okay, as God says to Moses, you cannot see me and live, and God reveals to Moses only his back, not his front. So you might say we're looking at the back, and therefore Chokhmah is on the right and is the divine right. Bina is on the left and is the left. Of the other sefirot, the ones that are most important for us tonight are really Tiferet, the masculine, sometimes pictured as heaven, and malchut or Shekhinah, symbolized by earth. She has very many names. You might say Shekhinah or malchut is the main character of the Zohar. Of all of the sefirot, the Zohar talks more about Shekhinah than about any others, and we'll focus on Shekhinah a good part of the time. Okay, I think we can begin the Zohar passage and see where that leads us. So have that chart handy. We're looking at page 5 of the Hakdama of the Zohar. Those of you who have the book, simply open to page 5. Some of you may have printed out the PDF of the first 50 pages or some of those. So we want to look at Hakdamat Sefer HaZohar. You'll see the page number 5 on the right-hand margin. Let me just explain the layout of this page, because for some of you, it's the first time you've opened a volume of the Zohar. The top of the page is Zohar. Here it's the top third or top quarter of the page. The bottom, those two columns, that's my commentary on the Zohar, drawing from traditional Kabbalistic commentaries, quoting passages from the Talmud and the Midrash, trying to unpack what the Zohar is saying. In our course, we'll be reading from the English text, and I'll be referring occasionally to the notes down below. Some of you are following in the original Aramaic, and I'll refer occasionally to Aramaic words. The Zohar is written in Aramaic, not in Hebrew, and we'll talk about why that is as the course progresses. But it is a unique style of Aramaic, unlike almost any other Aramaic you would encounter, different than the Talmud, different than what's called the Targum, the Aramaic translation of the Torah. It's a unique Aramaic that really typifies the Zohar and sets it apart from all other texts in the Jewish canon. The very top of the page, you see in small letters in italics, Hakdamat Sefer HaZohar. Hakdama means an introduction. Sefer, book. HaZohar, the radiance, the Zohar. So this is the introduction to the book of the Zohar. This is not my introduction or Arthur Green's introduction or anyone else's introduction. This is the Zohar's own introduction. In other words, the beginning of the Zohar, the first 30 pages in Aramaic, which requires about 100 pages of this English translation, that first chunk of the Zohar is titled The Introduction to the Zohar. It's really typical Zohar passages. It's a nice way to enter the Zoharic world. And we'll be focusing on that Hakdama certainly for these first 6 sessions and probably for part of the following, the next mini course too. Look at the top left, the running head on the top left of the page. That gives the traditional pagination in Aramaic in brackets. It says 1:1b. The first 1 means volume 1, because there are 3 volumes of the Zohar in traditional printing. The first volume covers the whole book of Genesis, Bereshit. The second volume covers the whole book of Exodus, Shemot. And the third volume covers the rest of the Torah. Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Vayikra, Bimidbar, Devarim. So this is from volume 1 of the Zohar, Zohar on Genesis, but we're not even up to Genesis. We're at the introduction, the Hakdama. We'll come to the Zohar on Genesis itself when the Hakdama is completed. So it's volume 1, then 1b simply means the first daf, the first double page of the Aramaic, and there's side A and side B. I decided tonight not to begin from the very beginning, but to begin from this page. We're on page 5 of the translation, page 5 of volume 1 of the Zohar Pritzker edition, and that's what we're studying tonight. So let's begin. Bereshit, in the beginning. Okay, anything in italics is a quote from the Bible itself. This, of course, we all recognize as the first word of the Torah. In Hebrew, it's one word. In English, it requires 3 words. Bereshit, in the beginning. Rabbi Elazar opened. Lift your eyes on high and see who created these. Okay, a quote from Isaiah. Isaiah is saying, look up into the heavens, look at the wondrous creation. Maybe he means, really gazing at night and looking at the moon and the stars. Who created these? Okay, it's a question of wonder. That really is the basic religious sentiment, the basic religious emotion is a sense of wonder. And that's formulated here very beautifully in Isaiah chapter 40. The Hebrew is Su'u enechem bamarom uru'u mi bara ele. Let me just show you the Hebrew quote here. We have the chart of the sefirot, and this is the beginning of, this is the quote from the Bible itself. Minimize this for a moment. This number 1 is the quote from Isaiah in Hebrew. Su'u marom enechem uru'u mi bara ele. Lift your eyes up on high, lift your eyes above, and see who created these. So Rabbi Elazar begins by quoting that verse. This is normal rabbinic style to open with a quotation from the Bible. You'd find this very many times in the Midrash, the rabbinic collection of interpretations, where a rabbi will begin not with his own words, but quoting a verse from the prophets or the writings, and then expounding it. Lift your eyes on high and see who created these. Lift your eyes on high. To which sight? The sight toward which all eyes gaze. Which is that? Opening of the eyes. So Rabbi Elazar wants to know more specifically, what should we look at? Isaiah, of course, means look at the moon, look at the stars, look at the heavens. But Rabbi Elazar says, well, where specifically are we meant to look? And he says it's a sight called opening of the eyes. This is one of the many ways that the Zohar refers to Shekhinah, to that divine feminine. The last of the 10 sefirot, her technical name was malchut, but as I said, I'll be calling her Shekhinah. Notice that the Zohar does not say Shekhinah, and this is very telling. The Zohar does not make it easy for us. The Zohar does not name the sefirot. Instead of saying bina, it will say the Divine Mother. Instead of saying tiferet, it'll say sun, S-U-N, or sun, S-O-N, or heaven. Instead of saying Shekhinah, it'll say earth, or ocean, or the holy apple orchard. And here Shekhinah is called opening of the eyes. Later you can, on your own, look down at note 26, and it explains a little bit about that phrase, but for now I think we'll just continue. So he's alluding here to Shekhinah. She is opening of the eyes. You might say she is the opening to the divine realm. She's the first thing you can gaze at. If you're gazing toward the divine, if you're trying to gain a vision of the sefirot, the higher sefirot are more inaccessible, but Shekhinah is more approachable. And she is the first quality of the divine that we encounter. According to the rabbis in the Talmud, Shekhinah is the divine presence that fills the whole world. So she is immediately accessible in a certain sense. Okay, I'm continuing with the Zohar. There you will discover that the concealed ancient one, susceptible to questioning, created these. Who is that? Who? Okay, so what is he saying? If you gaze at Shekhinah, if you begin to explore this divine realm, you'll discover that the concealed ancient one, okay, we don't know what that is, but it's somehow a higher realm, a higher sefirah. He's not naming it, he's just saying it's a more hidden realm. That more hidden realm created these. Okay, that's in italics because he's going back to the verse from Isaiah. Now, what did the verse say? The verse said, who created these? But Rabbi Elazar is taking that not as a question, but really as a statement. In other words, it's not who created these, it's who created these. In other words, who is the subject and these is the object. So these may mean the heavens, the stars. We'll see in a few minutes, what the these really refers to. Who is the name of a particular quality, and I'll just tell you what the Zohar means by the term who. If you look down at note 27, that's the left-hand column of the page. Left-hand column toward the bottom, you see 27, who. The Hebrew word is mi, mem yud, and that refers to bina, the Divine Mother. Actually, let's look at this note, because this is very helpful note. Mi, bina, the Divine Mother, is called who. A spiritual seeker may inquire about her, but such questions do not yield ordinary answers. The identity of the divine is discovered only in a realm beyond words. The mystical name who becomes a focus of meditation as question turns into quest. Or as one commentator on the Zohar, Shimon Lavi, his book Ketem Paz, I've abbreviated there, KP. Ketem Paz is a commentary on the Zohar, and Shimon Lavi, the author of that commentary, says, concerning everything that cannot be grasped, its question constitutes its answer. So this is a meditative question. Now it's interesting, the question who is a very central question in Vedanta. In Hindu philosophy, in Hindu mysticism, asking the question who, it's a method of self-inquiry. You're supposed to ask, who am I? Who am I really? Stripping away layers of identity, stripping away illusions we may have about ourselves. That's considered a stage, an important stage on the spiritual path. It's really the path itself, to ask again and again, who am I? So when the Zohar calls bina who, it's talking about a divine quality, but it's also encouraging the human seeker to keep asking that question. Who is God? Who am I? What is the link between those two identities? So that question of who is the name for the Divine Mother, the name for Bina. Notice that he's not giving us the name Bina. He didn't call Shekhinah Shekhinah. He called her opening of the eyes. And he doesn't call Bina Bina. He calls her by this name who. Now he gives a little more information. The one called end of heaven above. End of heaven above, whose domain extends over everything. Since it can be questioned, yet remains concealed and unrevealed, it is called who. Beyond, there is no question. So what does he mean beyond there is no question? You can't even ask a question about chokhmah, that primordial point. You can't even ask a question about no thingness, the divine ayin, nothing, and certainly Ein Sof. So Bina is the first of the sefirot that we can even ask a question. We're not guaranteed an answer, but at least we can pose that question. And the question itself turns into an answer. You might say the question, as Shimon Lavi says, the question itself gives you something of an answer because it gets you searching, it gets you discovering. The question leads to self-discovery. Why does he call her also end of heaven above? Because if you think of the chart of the sefirot, let's look at it again, just those of you who have it in front of you, and For now, we'll look at it starting next week. I'll expect that people just have it in front of them. So we're talking about Bina here, the Divine Mother. You could say she's the end of heaven. Remember, Tiferet is known as heaven. One of its names is heaven. So Bina is the end of heaven above, and it will turn out that malchut, Shekhinah, is the end of heaven below. Tiferet is the core of the sefirot. Above Tiferet is Bina, and below Tiferet is Shekhinah. Let's read a little bit more, and then I'll pause, and we'll see if there are some chats that we can address. We're moving now to page 6 in volume 1 of the Zohar Pritzker edition. This end of heaven is called who? There is another below called what? What distinguishes the two? The first, concealed one called who, can be questioned. Once a human being questions and searches, contemplating and knowing rung after rung to the very last rung, once one reaches there, what? What do you know? What have you contemplated? For what have you searched? All is concealed, as before. So he's saying Bina is the end of heaven above. Okay, the end of heaven above, he's saying that Tiferet is heaven. Bina is the end of heaven, even higher than Tiferet. Malchut, Shekhinah is the end of heaven below. I'll respond to that chat in a moment. Let me continue just explaining this paragraph first. Who refers to Bina? Shekhinah is called what? Shekhinah is called Ma. You notice that what is maybe is a less personal question. Who is delving more deeply? Who am I? Who is the divine personality? What is the first thing you ask? What is this? What is going on? But from his point of view, you begin by trying to explore that realm of Bina, and then you see all of the rungs that emerge from Bina. This would be moving from above to below. You address Bina by asking who, and then you see all of the rungs, that meaning the sefirot, that emerge from Bina. But when you know rung after rung, when you explore rung after rung, what do you end up with? After all of the spiritual search, what can you really grasp? How can you really formulate what you've discovered? There's still concealment. Even at the beginning of spiritual search, things are hidden, and during the search and even after the search. So the Zohar is not guaranteeing a clear answer. He's describing the difficulty of spiritual search. You begin, you ask who, but when you're done, you ask what have I discovered? Both of these questions refer to that pair of sefirot, Bina and Shekhinah. Yeah, someone asked a moment ago about gematria. Gematria, the numerical value. It turns out that the gematria of me is actually significant. The gematria, the numerical value of the word me, mem, yud, in Hebrew, mem is 40 and yud is 10. Together that equals 50. And according to the Talmud, there are 50 gates of bina. There are 50 gates of understanding. It's actually here on this quote here. If you look down at this third quote, Chamishim Sha'arei Bina. There are 50 gates of Bina that were created in the world. They were all given to Moshe, Chaser Echad, except for one. Moses discovered 49 of the 50 gates of Bina. As it says, you made him little less than Elohim. You made him little less than God. So perhaps when the Zohar uses the word me for Bina, it's alluding to that gematria. The term rung, someone asked on the Facebook page this week about that word rung. The Aramaic is darga. You could spell it D-A-R-G-A, Dalad Resh Gimel Aleph. Darga, like the Hebrew madrega or daraga. Darga means a rung or a step of a ladder. Can even mean ladder itself. That is the normal term that the Zohar uses to describe the sefirot. The Zohar doesn't use the names of the sefirot, and it also doesn't use the term sefirot. Very, very rarely will you find the word sefirot in the Zohar, but hundreds and hundreds of times you'll find the word dargin. The plural is dargin, D-A-R-G-I-N, you could spell it, and the singular darga, D-A-R-G-A. So that's how the Zohar refers to the sefirot, rung after rung, sefira after sefira. Let's pause here for a few minutes. If there are some questions on chat, we can address them. And I think a good number have built up, and my brother David might be able to identify a couple that seemed especially intriguing or stimulating. Yeah, the third great radical contribution of Kabbalah. So Ein Sof is the first, that God is unbounded. To balance the masculine and the feminine would be the second. Shekhinah is the counterpart, the partner of Tiferet. And the third is really what's called in Hebrew Tzorech Gavoah, the need on high, that God needs us. You often hear in religion that we need God, but the Zohar insists and Kabbalah insists that God is incomplete without us. God cannot be unified unless we unify the sefirot, and that is I think that the third great radical teaching. We'll see that constantly here, that we have an effect on the divine realm. We stimulate the divine romance, and we make God real in the world.
Okay, Daniel, someone asked about what does it mean to be the end of heaven above and the end of heaven below?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you meant that spiritually, personally, or in terms of the sefirot. The easiest answer is in the sefirot. I think I explained that Tiferet is heaven, above Tiferet is bina, and below Tiferet is malchut. And that's what the Zohar means most simply, that spanning the entire realm of emanation.
Right, and someone mentioned when you were talking about who and what, who implies a subject and what implies an object?
Yeah, what seems to be, just what is this? What am I encountering? I think who is a deeper question. Who am I? Who am I discovering? Who is psychological exploration. What is just, what is going on, or what am I encountering? Who I think is more profound, and for the Zohar that relates to a deeper, a higher level of the sefirot. The awakened person will experience which sefirah. Really, the sefirot are a path of meditation, or a path of spiritual ascent. The goal here is really to journey through all of them. Even though this passage talked about bina, more normally the journey would begin at Shekhinah, one tries to encounter the divine presence, and then to purify one's own limbs, to purify the traits of character, to cultivate, for example, chesed, to cultivate love, and to balance that love with limitation. If chesed is love, then gevurah is limiting that love, channeling that love, right? Not overpowering someone with your own passion, but realizing how much the other person is ready to receive. So if you can balance love and limitation, love and awe, love and judgment, then you end up at that central sefirah of Tiferet. And notice that one of the names for Tiferet on the chart is Rachamim, compassion. So that's interesting, compassion and love. Chesed is love, Tiferet is compassion. What's the difference between love and compassion? Now, different people would say different things, but I think for the Zohar, the difference is this. Love is unbounded love, and it's love that might be too much for the person to bear. Compassion is when you're expressing love, but in a way that takes into account what the other person is ready to receive. If the other person wants to engage, wants to receive your love, then compassion is the way to express love in a way that doesn't drown the other person, that doesn't overwhelm the other person. So compassion is the perfect balance between love and limitation, love and boundary. So that's one example of how one would imitate these divine qualities. These are divine qualities that one is supposed to imitate by perfecting your physical being, your emotional qualities, your intellectual potential. You realize, you actualize the divine image. If according to Genesis we are created in the divine image, then the sefirot are a way to really work with that, to work and play with that. Yes, compassion implies empathy, good. Realizing what another person feels, not just projecting your own feelings or passion, but recognizing the other person as a real thou, right? What Martin Buber calls the I-thou relationship. That would be compassion and not just passion. With passion with someone else and being aware of someone else.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
let me respond to this question here. Where do we learn about the sefirot if not in the Zohar? What are the sefirot before we come to the Zohar? Yeah, I don't want to get too involved with historical questions right now in our first session, but certainly I can respond briefly to that. The Zohar represents the crystallization of about a century, at least a century of Kabbalistic creativity. According to most scholars, Kabbalah really emerges in medieval Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries. And the Zohar, which appears at the end of the 13th century, presents us with this picture of the sefirot, which reflects what had been going on for about a century in earlier Kabbalistic writings. You have an earlier book called the Bahir, that book probably written about a century before the Zohar. There we have the sefirot, but we don't really have a divine romance. We don't have God as husband and wife. We have father and daughter, but not husband and wife. So that sexual quality of the sefirot is an innovation of Kabbalah in between the Bahir and the Zohar. The first time that the word sefirah or sefirot ever appears is in that very early text known as Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation or the book of creation. That may have been written as early as the 2nd century, the Common Era. And there it says that God created the world through the 22 letters of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet, and the 10 sefirot. So what does the term sefirot mean there? It doesn't mean qualities of God. It doesn't mean keter, chokhmah, bina. What it really means is simply the numbers 1 to 10. The numbers 1 to 10 are the tools with which God created the world. God used language and mathematics to create the world. Of course, any of us who are using digital objects, digital tools right now, right today, we should appreciate how basic mathematics is to all of life, to all of existence. And these authors of Sefer Yetzirah were aware of that. They were probably influenced by Pythagoras, who of course taught that the world is based on number.
By the way, Daniel, I see that there's 16 new messages, so maybe you might be busy the next week answering a lot of these on Facebook if there's not enough time now to answer everything. So,
Yeah, let's maybe one more question, and then we'll go back to the Zohar passage here.
I see that someone said, it seems to me that bina is the last possible trace of duality beyond which there is only unity, and thus the impossibility of asking a question.
That's interesting. Yeah, just asking a question implies a certain amount of dualism. There's a person asking and answering, or there's a question and an answer. Language itself, you might say, is dualistic, and bina gives birth to language. The alphabet emerges from bina in a sense. So beyond bina, higher than bina, we're just at that primordial point of chokhmah, which seems like a unity, a oneness, and then keter, which is that no thingness. and then, of course, Ein Sof itself. The multiple meanings of words and qualities elevates the reader to illuminated understanding. Yeah, these are qualities of God. Rather than focusing on the laws of the Torah, there's a focus here on the qualities of God. That's true to a certain extent, but the Zohar is fascinated by the legal aspect too. It's remarkable in Kabbalah how there's almost equal weight given to observance and experience. Observance of the Torah and mystical experience. You could say the Zohar is frustrated by a purely legalistic approach, but it also preserves the halacha. It wants to preserve the tradition and yet to deepen the experiential quality. The verse to keep in mind here, I think, is that beautiful verse in Psalms, in Psalm 34, Ta'amu u'ru'u ki tov Adonai. Taste and see that God is good. So you wonder, what does the psalm mean? Taste what? The psalm doesn't say taste, doesn't give an object. Taste and see that God is good. For the mystic, that means taste God. Taste God and you'll see that God is good. So all mystics in every tradition, and the Zohar too, insists on that experiential quality. Okay, let's continue with the Zohar passage, and we'll stop for more questions in a little while. We're on page 6 of volume 1, the second paragraph concerning this mystery. Concerning this mystery it is written, what can I take as a witness to you? What can I compare to you? Okay, the italics again shows that he's quoting from the Bible. This from the book of Eicha, right? Eicha, the book of Lamentations, describing the ruin of Jerusalem and mourning, lamenting over the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple. So what can I take as a witness to you? What can I compare to you? In other words, you were once so beautiful. God is addressing the Jewish people or the city of Jerusalem. You were once so beautiful. What has happened to you? When the Holy Temple was destroyed, a voice cried out, what can I take as a witness to you? What can I compare to you? But once again, the question turns into a statement. The Zohar turns the question into a declaration. It's not what can I take as it's not what can I compare to you, it's what I compare to you. I compare what to you. Now remember, what is a name for Shekhinah. So God is really saying, I compare what? I compare Shekhinah to you. Israel is being compared to Shekhinah, even in her state of destruction. I take what as a witness to you? Every single day I have called witnesses against you since days of old. This is God speaking. As is written, I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day. So there are always witnesses spoken about, but here God is saying, I compare you to what? Precisely. Now that word precisely, what that usually means in the Zohar is precisely referring to a sefirah. In other words, don't take this as just any ordinary word. It's not the normal sense of the word what, it's precisely what. In other words, it's what in its divine significance. So without saying the word Shekhinah, he's alluding to Shekhinah. I compare you to Shekhinah precisely. Now we'll see why that is. I crowned you with holy crowns. Okay, God is addressing the Jewish people. I gave you dominion over the world. As is written, is this the city that was called perfect crown of beauty, joy of all the earth? I called you Jerusalem, built up, a city bound together. Now what can I liken to you to console you? Now, in other words, I'll compare you to what? Now, why is Israel compared to Shekhinah even in her desolate state? Because, the Zohar continues, just as you sit desolate, so it is above, as it were. What does that mean? Just as the people of Israel are desolate, are in exile, now that the temple has been destroyed, so it is above. What does that mean, so it is above? So it is in the realm of the sefirot. In other words, Shekhinah herself is somehow desolate. Shekhinah suffers exile along with the people. This is a remarkable idea. This is an example of something that you find in the Talmud and the Midrash, There we hear about the exile of Shekhinah. Shekhinah herself has gone into exile along with the Jewish people, but the Zohar emphasizes that to a much greater extent. So when he says, so it is above, he means so it is in the divine world. Shekhinah herself is, in a sense, desolate or exiled. Now notice he adds he adds this term, as it were. The Hebrew, the Aramaic there is kiviyachol, as if it were possible. Because even for the Zohar, this sounds a little shocking. To say that Shekhinah is desolate, that Shekhinah is in exile, he has to pull back a little bit. He has to qualify it, as it were, as if it were possible. Other times we'll see we don't have that word, as it were. The Zohar just comes out and says it. Yes, someone has just said, if God requires us to complete him, then our desolation disrupts that union. Exactly. This is a beautiful example of how what we do on earth, or what happens to us on earth, has an effect on God. Because Israel is in exile, God is somehow also in exile. Now, someone just asked, what does this have to do with the word Bereshit? We have to be a little patient, okay? The Zohar is talking about the opening words of the Torah, but will take quite a while to get back to that. Eventually, this may take us a few sessions. We'll see how that. Actually, I'm sure already by next time, we'll see how this relates to the opening words of the Torah. Just as you sit desolate, so it is above, as it were. Just as now the holy people do not enter you in holy array. What does that mean? You is Jerusalem. Okay, he's addressing Jerusalem. Just as now the people of Israel cannot enter Jerusalem because Jerusalem has been destroyed, so I swear to you, God says to Israel, that I myself will not enter above until your inhabitants enter you below. What does that mean? God will, Tiferet, okay, the central sefirah, that masculine sefirah, sometimes referred to as Yud He Vav He, that central sefirah will not enter Shekhinah. He won't enter her. He won't unite with her. He won't enter heavenly Jerusalem, because Shekhinah is pictured as heavenly Jerusalem. God will not enter, the masculine part of God will not enter Shekhinah until Israel once again enters below. This is your consolation. How is Israel being consoled in exile? I compare this rung to you completely. In other words, Israel has a partner in the divine. They're suffering exile. Shekhinah is suffering along with them. But now that you are here, your ruin is vast as the ocean, because Israel's here in exile. They are in a state of desolation. Yet, if you say you cannot endure or be healed, then who will heal you? Okay, that's how the verse in Lamentations continues. Who will heal you? Of course, it's a rhetorical question, meaning you won't possibly be healed. Who can possibly heal you? You're suffering so deeply, who can heal you? But how does the Zohar mean it? Not as a question, but again as a declaration. Who, namely Bina, will heal you? Don't be distraught. Don't feel abandoned, because Bina will heal you. Notice really. Again, really refers to the sefirot. The Hebrew there, the Aramaic, here it's Hebrew, vadai. Okay, vadai, certainly, really. When the Zohar says vadai, it means referring to the sefirot. Yes, Bina is the mother and Shekhinah is the daughter. Earthly Jerusalem is simply earthly Jerusalem. Okay, heavenly Jerusalem is Shekhinah. Earthly Jerusalem is the city of Jerusalem. And God is saying that, in a sense, God himself and herself are incomplete until Israel returns to Jerusalem. He's talking about the physical reality of Jerusalem. That concealed high rung in which all exists, namely Bina, will heal you and raise you up. So Israel will be redeemed by Bina. Even though Shekhinah is suffering along with the people, there's a promise here of redemption, and Bina will bring that redemption. I want to say one other thing about Shekhinah. One of the many names of Shekhinah is the Hebrew term Knesset Yisrael. And someone just said, this sounds like the Virgin Mary. It's no accident that the Zohar was written in Spain and in Christian Spain. The Zohar is in one sense polemicizing against Christianity, many places in the Zohar. But on the other hand, you can't deny that the Christians have a feminine to which they are connected, and Kabbalah presents Shekhinah as the divine feminine. So there is a certain parallel there, and we can talk more about that as we proceed. But this term Knesset Yisrael means the assembly of Israel, or the people of Israel. Excuse me for a moment. Shekhinah is the assembly of Israel. Usually in the Talmud, almost all the time in the Talmud and the Midrash, Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of Israel, means the people. The people of Israel are called Knesset Yisrael. In the Zohar, sometimes it refers to the people, but most of the time it refers to Shekhinah. And this is very startling, because what the Zohar is really saying is that there's an intimate connection between Israel and Shekhinah. You might say Israel are the embodiment of Shekhinah, and Shekhinah is the totality of Israel. In one place, the Zohar says that every Jew is one limb of the Shekhinah. So the Shekhinah is the totality of the people raised up to a divine level. So that term will come across, we haven't seen it yet, but we'll come across it very often in the Zohar. Whenever it says in English here, assembly of Israel, and I always capitalize it, assembly of Israel is the English translation of the Hebrew term Knesset Yisrael, and we'll see how that can refer both to the people Israel and to Shekhinah. It's a way of saying that we're meant to be linked with the divine. We're meant to attain a state of divekut, a state of union with the divine. Let's read a little bit more. We're going to read for about another 5 minutes, and then I'm going to open it to questions, chat, and perhaps otherwise. So we're at the top of page 7 now. Who, and again, remember, anything italicized is because it's being quoted from the Bible. Who is end of heaven above? Okay, which we now know means bina is that higher realm above Tiferet, above heaven. What is end of heaven below? Okay, Shekhinah is known as what is below Tiferet, below that divine heaven. Jacob inherited this, running from end to end. That phrase from end to end, look down at note 38. This is page 7, the left-hand column below, the top of that left-hand column, note 38, running from end to end. That's a description of the central wooden beam of the tabernacle, right? That portable shrine, the portable dwelling in the desert. It's described in great detail in the book of Exodus, and there's a central wooden beam that runs from end to end. Yes, this is also the spine of the sephirotic body would be Tiferet, and then that whole central column. So the Zohar applies that to Tiferet. Okay, if we look once again at that chart of the sefirot, Tiferet is in the middle, but this whole central bar, the central pillar, right, running from Keter all the way down through Yesod to Shekhinah, to Malchut, Tiferet really represents that entire bar running from end to end. Here he's really saying specifically from bina near the top, right, who's end of heaven above, to Shekhinah, Malchut near the bottom, end of heaven below. Jacob symbolizes Tiferet. Okay, this gives us a chance to speak for a moment about this central triad. And really you hear a lot in the Zohar about this triad of the sefirot. Chesed, notice, is identified with Abraham, symbolized by Abraham. Isaac symbolizes Gevurah, and Jacob and Moses, but especially Jacob, symbolizes Tiferet. Now, one way to understand that is really, again, as human qualities. Abraham embodied love. Abraham expressed love. He's the model of generosity in the Torah. right? You hear stories in the Midrash of Abraham sitting at his tent and welcoming in all strangers. The Torah itself, we hear of Abraham welcoming the three messengers. So Abraham practiced such generosity that he attained the divine quality of chesed. He became that quality. The way the Zohar would put it is that he climbed up to that rung. He reached the rung of chesed. So he's an embodiment of chesed. He symbolizes chesed. Isaac, on the other hand, recall the biblical stories about Isaac. The most dramatic one is, of course, when he was bound on the altar by his father Abraham and almost sacrificed. So you might say that Isaac's primal experience of God was one of terror or fear, coming back to that word pachad. And you remember, pachad is a name for that sefirah on the left. Chesed on the right, pachad on the left. So if Abraham embodies love, Isaac had such a deep experience of fear, of awe, of terror, that is how he related to God. You might say for the rest of his life, Isaac is a wounded character. Remember, at the end of his life, Isaac goes blind. And there's relatively little said about Isaac. If you compare how much Genesis says about Abraham, Isaac's father, and how much Genesis says about Jacob, Isaac's son, there's relatively little about Isaac. It's as if he's somehow in a dark realm. He's over on the left side. He's dominated by fear. And in fact, it's remarkable. There's a divine name in Genesis. It comes only twice in the whole Bible, both times in Genesis. Pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Isaac, the terror of Isaac, you might translate it. What does that mean? That's how Isaac related to God. He related to God out of fear because of that primal childhood experience of being bound on the altar. You might say he suffered from post-traumatic stress. That binding of Isaac on the altar, that near-death experience, colored his perception of God, his relationship to God. So he really experienced God as pachad, and God became for him pachad Yitzchak, the fear of Isaac. Jacob is seen as the balance of chesed and pachad, the balance of Abraham and Isaac. He attained a more harmonious relationship. He, after all, became Yisrael, and the progenitor of all of the people, of the tribes. Jacob is seen as occupying that central sphere. And here, the Zohar is simply saying, Jacob inherited this, running from end to end. So he spans above and below, and he also spans or balances right and left. He's right in the middle. From first end who to last end what? For he stands in the middle. So who created these? We'll just read a few more lines. Rabbi Shimon said, okay, up till now we've heard everything from Rabbi Elazar, and now we hear from the hero of the Zohar, the main character of the Zohar, the main human character, is Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon, son of Yochai, a very famous figure of the Mishnah and the Talmud, one of the great students of Rabbi Akiva. So in the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon is the hero. Rabbi Shimon is the central figure. All of the other companions, we are on page 7 now, page 7 of volume 1. Rabbi Shimon is the hero of the Zohar, and all of the companions discuss with him and debate among themselves. Rabbi Shimon usually has the most profound insight. Here we have a little dialogue between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar. Until now, Rabbi Elazar has been speaking, and now his father, Rabbi Shimon, wants to add something. Rabbi Shimon said, Elazar, my son, cease your words. Okay, stop speaking. You've said enough. It's not that he disagrees with what Rabbi Elazar has said, but he wants to add something more profound. Cease your words so that the concealed mystery on high, unknown to any human, may be revealed. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon is now going to speak about the higher realms of the sefirot relating to bina, and immediately Rabbi Elazar was silent. Okay, rather than continuing here, I think we'll pick up at this point next time in the Zohar, but I want to devote the last 10 minutes of our scheduled time, and then I'm happy to stay longer. Any of you who can stay or would like to stay, we're open for discussion now. Let's begin with chat. I'd like to ask first people who have not yet posed a question that was answered. So Jill is asking, can I say a little about bina being connected to the womb? I mean, basically, bina being the divine mother gives birth to the lower sefirot. It's interesting, of course, maybe what's behind your question is also the connection between rechem, right, the Hebrew word for womb, and rachamim, compassion. And after all, Tiferet, who is known as Rachamim, is the son. Tiferet is the son of Bina. So you could say Rachamim comes from Rechem. Rachamim, Tiferet, emerges from the divine womb, Rechem. And that links those sefirot, especially Bina and Tiferet. Someone else, and please, I'm happy to hear from someone who has not yet had any background in Zohar, for whom some of this must seem a little bit strange. On page 6, we have concerning the mystery. On page 7, we have so that the mystery. Yeah, let's look back at for a moment at page 6. Yeah, I mean, the Zohar says, you know, the word mystery, the Aramaic is raza. In Hebrew would be raz, resh zayin, R-A-Z, R-A-Z-A. That word appears very frequently in the Zohar. So on page 6, when he said concerning this mystery, he really meant the mystery of who and the mystery of what, right? Talking about Bina and Shekhinah. And now on page 7, so that the concealed mystery on high may be revealed. Yes, you could say this is the same mystery. It's about Bina, but Rabbi Shimon is going to probe it more deeply. Is the palace associated with Bina, is it comparable to the Hechalot? Yeah, one of the names for Bina is Hechal, is palace, and that reminds us of earlier Jewish mysticism, where we have a whole series, a description of a whole series of Hechalot, of heavenly palaces, and the mystic who attains a vision of God has to journey from earth to heaven, and then journey through these various palaces. When the Zohar describes Bina as Hechal, I think it's more in the sense of the singular, but there is a whole section of the Zohar known as the Hechalot. That is actually 2 sections of the Zohar called Hechalot. One that's often in volume 1 of the Zohar, and one the end of Shemot. Those are translated together in the Pritzker edition in volume 12. The last volume in the Pritzker edition covers the Hechalot. Someone just asked, why is the only matriarch recognized in the Sefirot Rachel? Yeah, Rachel's not the only one. Rachel is identified with Shekhinah, and it's interesting which matriarch is identified with Leah. I'm sorry, I gave the answer. Which matriarch is identified with Bina? That's Leah. Leah, who's often neglected. You know, Rachel seems to get better press in Genesis, and of course, Mother Rachel and Kever Rachel. But according to the Zohar, Bina is symbolized by Leah. So you could say that Leah is on a higher rung than Rachel. The way the Zohar explains that is that Leah is more concealed, Leah is more hidden. Rachel is identified with Shekhinah, I think especially because she is joining in the people's exile. Shekhinah is mourning with the people, and we hear already in the prophet Jeremiah that Rachel mivaka al baneha. Rachel is crying over her children. So Rachel fits perfectly with Shekhinah as sharing in Israel's exile. Leah is more concealed, less is said about her, and she's associated with Bina, that hidden realm. Rabbi Gittleman is asking, what's really at stake here? What's going on in this passage? The Zohar this really connects with a question someone asked before. When are we going to get to Genesis? The Zohar claimed to be talking about the opening words of the Torah, Bereshit, and Bereshit bara Elohim. The Zohar wants to interpret the name Elohim and it's inching its way toward that. I would say that, sometimes it's hard to say what the Zohar is getting at, and I think we have to be careful with that question. Usually when we read something, we want to know, well, what's the point? And if you ask what's the point in the Zohar, sometimes you're left with no point, right? You remember the question that the Zohar posed at the beginning of the passage we're reading here, who? You can ask that question, who, but you can't expect a clear answer. It's not always easy, and it's not even always productive to ask what's the point of the passage. Now, I realize it's impossible for any modern reader to open a book and avoid that question, but I want us to leave that open. I wouldn't want to say at this point what the Zohar is trying to get at. Maybe as we complete the passage, we can talk about that more. For right now, it's really, I think we just have to surrender to the stream of imagery and let the passage, carry us away. I would put off analyzing it right now. The balance of the feminine and masculine. Why is God always referred to as he? Yeah, it's a very important question. The Zohar, as I said, one of the great contributions is to balance the he with she. By the way you can tell that Shekhinah is feminine is because the first three letters are S-H-E. Okay, sometimes English works even better than Aramaic. So Shekhinah is the she, and it's wrong to refer to God just as he. Of course, you can't avoid that with the Torah and the Talmud and the Mishnah and the Midrash, but in the Zohar we'll find, I would say that Shekhinah plays a more prominent role than almost any other sefirah. God is still masculine to a great extent, but God is, if not equally feminine, almost equally feminine in terms of the amount of coverage given to Shekhinah. We can even keep track of that. But notice so far we've really been talking about bina and Shekhinah, about the two feminine qualities, much more than Tiferet. Tiferet is there as heaven, but the passage so far has been much more about the feminine than the masculine. If I fall occasionally or often into calling God he, you can correct me, because it's very often the wrong pronoun. Was Shimon a follower of Bar Kokhba? Rabbi Shimon's teacher, Rabbi Akiva, is seen as being a supporter, a promoter of Bar Kokhba, the messianic figure, the one who led a revolt against Rome in the early part of the 2nd century of the Common Era. Rabbi Shimon comes a little bit later, but you remember Rabbi Akiva, his teacher, was martyred, was executed by the Romans. The Romans are also out to get Rabbi Shimon, and that may be because of political activities, it may be because of his devotion to Torah study. And according to Talmudic legend, Rabbi Shimon hid in a cave for 12 years, and then an additional year, he hid with his son Elazar. And according to Kabbalistic tradition, that's how the Zohar began to be composed. Not to decompose, to be composed in that cave. That cave where they hid, and that cave is identified as a cave near Tzfat, near Meron. That cave, or not in that vicinity in the Galil, that cave, according to tradition, is where the Zohar began to be composed. So Rabbi Shimon's being in the cave is a very important element in the Zohar. Yeah, Rabbi Elazar is silenced by his father because his father, Rabbi Shimon, now wants to go on and offer a more profound level of teaching. If time is needed for the creation of reality, is bina the first manifestation where time exists? It's hard to say where time comes into being. Really, you might say bina gives birth to time because the 7 lower sefirot are identified as the 7 days of creation. So the 7 days of creation, you could say that's where time comes into play, but these are cosmic days. In other words, chesed manifests itself on the first day of creation, but it still is in an ethereal realm. What was created on the first day? Light. And chesed is divine light, divine radiance. So that fits very well. What happened on the second day? There was division division between the waters above and the waters below. And which sefirah comes after chesed? Day number 2 would be gevurah, limitation, restriction, judgment, definition, division. So that fits very well with the theme of day 2 in Genesis of division. If Rachel represents Shekhinah, can Yesod, how can Yosef come before malchut? Okay, if we look, let's take a peek again at that diagram of the sefirot. We've spoken about Rachel being identified with Shekhinah, malchut. Yesod, the divine phallus, is identified with Joseph. So I guess behind your question is, Rachel gives birth to Joseph, so how can Joseph precede Shekhinah? That's not a problem for the Zohar, okay? There's a principle in the Midrash, Ein mukdam u'mu'uchar b'Torah. There's no earlier and later in the Torah. So you can have things coming out of temporal sequence. For the Zohar, things can be later in the Bible, but earlier in terms of the Sefirot. The question is really, why is Joseph identified with Yesod? What does Joseph have to do with the divine phallus? The reason for that identification is the dramatic story in Genesis where Joseph is nearly seduced by Potiphar's wife. And because he withstood the temptation, he is identified with holy sexuality. In other words, he represents the proper use, the proper attitude towards sexuality. Okay, he wanted to unite with his intended partner and not with the wife of his owner, of his boss, Potiphar. So because he resisted that temptation, he's called Yosef HaTzadik. That already appears in rabbinic literature, that title, Yosef HaTzadik, and Yosef the righteous one, and probably because of his resisting temptation. It's interesting, tzaddik and yesod, I'm going to close this now. Tzaddik and yesod go together because of a verse in Proverbs, v'tzaddik yesod olam. The righteous person is the foundation of the world. Actually, in Proverbs, it means the righteous person is an eternal foundation. The word olam in Hebrew can mean all of space or all of time. But in rabbinic literature and in the Zohar, it usually means all of space, the world. So Joseph was the foundation of the righteous one is the foundation of the world, according to Proverbs. If it's tzaddik, yesod olam, and that's why tzaddik, righteous one, is associated with yesod, foundation, and Joseph is the tzaddik because of his self-restraint. So we have an indication that the rise of feminine qualities of Hashem impacted the quality of life we have for Jewish women at the time. In other words, any indication that the wife of a Zohar scholar would never have been treated as more of an equal than the tradition of women at that time. Very good question. In other words, theologically, there is a real breakthrough here. It's giving equal or almost equal status to the divine feminine as to the masculine. The question is, was that translated into historical reality, into cultural reality? It's hard to know how the Kabbalists related to their wives. From the description of sexual ethics, you get the sense that there was a great deal of respect and a mutuality in sexual relations. But I would say, that it's taken 700 years for the equality of the feminine really to be translated into historical reality. In the Me Too movement. So it's still obviously an ongoing process. We have not yet reached gender equality. So I would say there's a great breakthrough made in the Zohar on a theoretical plane, and only the beginnings of that really manifesting on the historical social plane. For the purpose of understanding the Zohar, does the feminine masculine issue matter? Definitely. I mean, to understand the Zohar, the interaction between feminine and masculine is central to the Zohar's teaching. On the one hand, it's balancing the patriarchal God with the feminine, and it's saying that human beings have to relate sexually. You have to find your sexual partner in order to fulfill yourself. And in order to have an effect on God, and I should say here, right away, the Zohar does not condone homosexuality. The Zohar would not relate positively to homosexuality. And this is something that, that we need to update. I would say here too that I don't really encourage people to become Kabbalists. I think there's great depth. I think there's great profundity in the Zohar, but I think we have to be careful about accepting everything in the Zohar or everything in the Kabbalah. We should let it enrich our lives spiritually and midrashically. We should let it enrich how we read the Torah, but we shouldn't accept everything in the Torah, in the Zohar, as absolute truth. We have to remember it was written centuries ago. We'll talk about the dating and the history of the Zohar next time a little bit more, but the Zohar is not a contemporary work, and I think it has eternal wisdom, but it also needs updating, and one should not accept everything in the Zohar as necessarily accurate for our lives today. I described Ein Sof as white space. Could I say more? Yeah, what I meant by white space is, if we look at this little box here we see right here, the Zoom group chat, we have specific words, specific letters, then we have white space. If you pictured infinity as white space, then extending off in all directions, and in fact, in Hebrew, you would say extending off ad ein sof, until ein sof, infinitely. So the white space is one way of picturing the divine. I see someone wrote white fire. Right, you have an image in the Midrash of black fire on white fire, that the Torah was originally revealed black fire on white fire, and that image the Zohar plays with also.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, let's take a live question, a vocal question, please.
So I'm going to make a statement actually. It seems to me that it's Shekhinah's role to bring us all to God. Shekhinah has all the work. God sits back and waits so that they can mate and reproduce goodness, bringing us closer to Hashem.
Yeah, you could say that, but remember, as someone mentioned before in one of the chats, Shekhinah is not different than God. Okay, Shekhinah is not separate from God. Shekhinah, you could say, is half of God, okay, or 1/10 of God. It's not that you have God and then Shekhinah, right? God is masculine and feminine. So part of God we're referring to as Tiferet, or what the Zohar often says, the Holy One, blessed be He, and the partner of Tiferet would be Shekhinah. So you're right that Shekhinah, being the last of the 10 sefirot, Shekhinah is the one that's most accessible to us, and she brings us to the higher sefirot. But if you reach Shekhinah, you've already reached God. Okay, so I want to clarify that. That's a very good point. A good question.
Also, getting back to compassion, I like to think the truth that belongs in Gevurah and Chesed, the combination of something perhaps is not right, and Chesed is the love that understands and takes that truth and brings love into it.
Yeah, you're saying that Gevurah is more making a judgment as to whether it's right or wrong, and Chesed is trying to be open to the insight, even in something that's wrong. Yeah, you could say that. Anyone else have a question? I think wonderful what we're doing, just to unmute yourself momentarily if you're going to ask a question, then mute again. That way we won't have any.
So yeah, I'm wondering how we know that who is bina and that what is Shekhinah and the opening of the eyes is Shekhinah. Like, where did you learn all? Like, how do you know that?
Yeah. Basically, it's a very good question, and I'm drawing on centuries of Kabbalistic commentary, commentators on the Zohar. From very soon after it first appeared in Spain in the 13th century, you have people quoting and then trying to unpack the Zohar, and then you have systematic commentaries. I guess the first systematic commentaries don't really appear for a few centuries, but a number of them attempt to go through the Zohar page by page, even paragraph by paragraph, and say, this symbol refers to Tiferet, this symbol refers to Keter. And there's a consensus in those commentators about certain things, not always. Okay, you do have commentators that differ. There's a wonderful guidebook, and I'll mention this because people might want to make use of it. There's a guidebook to the symbolism of the sefirot that was composed right at the time when the Zohar first appeared, at the end of the 13th century. The book is called Sha'arei Ora, Gates of Light. Again, we have light and gates. The Gates of Light, Sha'arei Ora, written by a man named Gikatila, Gika. And all of these, any book that I refer to, almost every book I refer to, you can find at the bibliography at the back of volume 1. Since a good number of you have that, I'll just show you where it is right now. The bibliography at the back, and please, take a look at this. It goes first by primary sources and then secondary sources. But if you look at page 468, those of you who have the book, and others of you will get it within a week or so. Page 468, volume 1, you see Gikatila, Joseph Gikatila, Sha'arei Ora. And that book actually has been translated into English. I believe the author is Avi Weinstein. It's called Gates of Light, and it's a wonderful guidebook to the symbolism of the sefirot, one chapter each on each of the sefirot, beginning not at the top, but more logically at Shekhinah. So you have a chapter on Shekhinah, a chapter on Yesod, then you have one chapter combining the next two sefirot, Netzach and Hod. But every other sefirah has its own chapter, and all that he does is to quote verses from the Bible and identify symbols. So I'm not sure that he mentions Petach Einayim, he very well might, but he certainly mentions me, who, as a name for bina. I noticed that someone said in a chat, but I would say to further answer your question, it's not always clear what the symbols refer to. And in fact, as I mentioned, responding to Rabbi Gittleman, you have to be very careful about interpreting what the symbols are, because sometimes it's better not to interpret it. Sometimes it's better to let the Zohar's poetry have its effect on you and not say this is that and this is that, not identify everything. Now, I've indulged in a good amount of that, and most Zohar commentaries do, and often it's unavoidable. The Zohar does intend that certain names and certain symbols refer to certain sefirot. But sometimes it's good to let the poetry of the Zohar work its magic on you, at least to begin with, and then to go back and try to unpack it. In fact, those of you who want to prepare as we're moving ahead, we said that for this week we would look at pages 5 to 8. We'll certainly spend a good deal of time next week, next week just on pages 7 and 8, completing this. And it's nice to read the text by itself without thinking about the notes. Don't even bother with the notes. Read a paragraph, read a page on its own, and then you can glance at the notes. Don't immediately go down to the note so that we don't lose the power of the language.
Could I ask a question?
Daniel?
Yes, please.
Okay. This has to do with the various, if you want, directions on how some of this symbolism went.
Excuse me, I think you're holding up right there the book I mentioned.
Yes, I am.
Yes,
believe it or not.
Yeah, please show that to people. It's beautiful.
There we go. Anyway, my question, other than showing it,
yes.
Is that this text versus Cordovero, and then also, the Ari, I heard that there was kind of a push on the symbolism, that there isn't, if you want, a straight line, that this had been sort of sidelined, just like Cordovera, in regards to the Ari. Can you comment on that?
Yes. By the Ari, for those of you who don't know, the Ari is the name for Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, Isaac Luria. So Cordovero, Moses Cordovero and Isaac Luria were two of the great Kabbalists in Tzfat, that beautiful Galilean town of Safed or Tzfat, that became a center of Kabbalah about 3 centuries after the Zohar appeared. Again, the Zohar appeared in Spain, the 13th century. 300 years later, you have a revival of Kabbalistic creativity in Safed, up to a large extent due to the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. Many of the Jews who were expelled from Spain made their way across North Africa, across the Mediterranean, and ended up in Palestine, in Eretz Israel. Some of them went to Safed, to Tzfat. Why did they go to Tzfat? Partly because Rabbi Shimon, the hero of the Zohar, is buried near Tzfat, in Meron. So that was a magnet drawing Kabbalists and spiritual seekers to Safed. So in Safed, Cordovero lived, and he wrote a huge commentary on the Zohar.
No, we can't hear you.
He wrote a huge commentary on the Zohar called Or Yakar. Can you hear me? He wrote an immense commentary on the Zohar called Or Yakar, Cordovero. And then Isaac Luria had his own spurt of Kabbalistic creativity. And Isaac Luria's reformulation of Kabbalah became very dominant. You might say that most of Kabbalah after Isaac Luria is Lurianic Kabbalah. So you could also say, and this I guess is what you were alluding to, Yosef, that the simple meaning of the Zohar gave way to Luria's interpretation of the Zohar. A lot of what I'm trying to do in my commentary here is to preserve, to regain, to restore the original meaning of the Zohar. In other words, what I think the authors of the Zohar meant when they wrote, and that commentators really devoted themselves to for several hundred years before Isaac Luria gave his interpretation of the Zohar. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we. Yes.
Question. Could we look upon the Zohar as a cipher where when it says who is bina and what is Shekhinah, that wherever we come across the word me or ma in Torah, that it could also be a subtext for bina or Shekhinah?
Yeah, I mean, he is suggesting that the term me refers to bina. Now, I don't think he means that every single time we see the word me, who, Hebrew me and English who, right? This is very strange for people who don't know Hebrew, know a little bit of Hebrew. Those of you who went to Hebrew school probably remember me is who, and who is he, and he is she. It's, moving from Hebrew to English. Hebrew me means who in English. Hebrew who means he in English. Hebrew he means she in English. But it would be madness to read every single instance of the word me, English who, in the Bible as alluding to Shekhinah, alluding to bina. But the Zohar does do that occasionally, much more often with who than with what, much more often with the Hebrew me than with ma. But we'll definitely find other examples of that. So he's seeing the Bible as a cipher, as a secret code. This is the original biblical code, you might say, and that's a lot of what the Zohar is doing. You think the verse means this? No, it really means that. And that book of Jikatilla, that guide to the symbolism of the Zohar, is a handy guidebook for that. By the way, the glossary at the end of each volume is a glossary, and I don't have glossary entries for who or what, but I do have them for every one of the sefirot and for many of the terms that we'll run across. So take a look at that, and that will help you too.
Can I ask two
Sure,
questions?
please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. And let's have, if everyone else could please mute their mic for the moment, and just you keep yours unmuted. Yeah.
Okay, just sort of
Wait. Two people are speaking at once. First,
I think Ellen was about to ask a question, and there's
yes,
If I could.
yeah, let's Ellen start, and then.
Okay. In Psalms, there's reference to gates, and I always loved that reference, and I thought maybe it was referring to like the divine opening to prayer. And so
Yes.
Is that the same meaning of gates and bina?
Yeah, the Zohar will apply the term gate to any sefirah. In other words, bina is not the only gate. If you had to say that one sefirah was the gate, I would really say it's Shekhinah, because Shekhinah is the opening of the divine realm. Shekhinah is the first sefirah that we encounter. So all of the sefirot could be called gates. In that book that Yosef was holding up, Gates of Light, he means the sefirot. When the Zohar uses the plural gates, that refers to all the sefirot. And when the Zohar uses the singular gate, it can refer to one or another. but I would say that Shekhinah is more typically gate. Now there was someone else who began to ask a question, and then yes,
I had one other question.
one other question, sure.
Thanks. You said that the Zohar does not accept homosexuality, but it's interesting that malchut could be King David, and then you've got Yesod as being Joseph. So is it some kind of blatant homoeroticism that appears?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because it would be too simplistic to say the Zohar is opposed to, male bonding. Certainly, there is a lot of I would say there is a certain amount of gender fluidity in the Zohar. You definitely would find that Shekhinah is, of course, feminine, but she's also described as king of the world, ruling the world. And that may be why King David is associated with her. She is the perfection of kingdom. Even though Bina is the divine mother, Bina is also the beginning of what's called Alma de Dechora, the world of the male, as if all the sefirot from Chochma to Yesod are masculine, and then all of them unite with Shekhinah, the feminine. So there is a certain amount of fluidity. There's also a lot of male bonding, a lot of intimacy between the chevraya, intimacy between the companions, and we'll see some examples of that. So it would be too simplistic to leave it as I put it. I'm glad you asked that. Someone else had a question, and then we'll
tell us about Da'at.
Wait.
I've been waiting.
Yes, please. It's your turn. Please.
Tali, I've been waiting. Yes.
Yeah,
okay. Mentioned before Cordovero, and what I have learned that in terms of Luria designating the relationship to the species to the lower sefirot, the Cordovero designated the female prophets different, and that Chesed being aligned with as Chesed with Abraham, he aligned Sarah. Miriam Tiferet was Deborah, and Netzach was Hannah, and Abigail Hood, where Yosef stood at Yesod, was Huldah, and Esther as Malchut. And that's in terms of female prophets. And there's an amazing book with tremendous research. It's called The Kabbalistic Teachings of the Female Prophets, the Seven Holy Women of Israel, by Zohar Hieronymus.
Great, thank you. Yeah, but Cordovero was very creative, and he uses symbolism in very unique ways. His commentary on the Zohar is literally 15 or 16 volumes. So you can find a lot of creativity and a lot of imaginative interpretation there. There are other places, where he would talk about the masculine quality of Yesod or Tiferet, but what you're saying definitely fills out the picture. And I would say, there is not one way to understand or represent the Sefirot. Different Kabbalists present this in different ways. I would also say there's not one Kabbalah. There's not one true Kabbalah. You have different Kabbalists offering different representations. Luria is certainly different than Cordovero. What we're going to focus on especially is I had a teacher once in Jerusalem, a wonderful woman, Rivka Schatz, a student of Sholem, and she said what she was interested in is Pshat HaZohar, okay, the simple meaning of the Zohar. Now that sounds like an oxymoron, but that really is my goal. We can see where it takes us and where it leads us, but I want to know what the Zohar intended to the extent that we can discover that. I want to respond to one chat question that showed up a minute ago. Someone said, didn't it all really start in Germany? And I was talking about Spain. There are different stages of Jewish mysticism. Kabbalah is not the beginning of Jewish mysticism. The Zohar is not the first mystical book in Judaism. The Bible certainly has deeply spiritual and prophetic, perhaps mystical passages. The book of Psalms, Ezekiel's vision of the chariot. You have different stages of Jewish mysticism. You have rabbinic mysticism with the Hechalot, the palaces, and trying to plumb the secrets of creation. And then you have a great creative period in Ashkenaz, in Germany or Franco-Germany, known as Chassidut Ashkenaz, German Hasidism. This is, 500 years before what we usually call Hasidism with the Baal Shem Tov. This is back in the 12th and 13th centuries, German Hasidism. That is an important stage in Jewish mysticism, and that contributed to the Zohar and contributed to Kabbalah. It's not usually called Kabbalah, but it certainly is a part of Jewish mysticism. So the German tradition is there. Zhenya is raising her hand, and if you have a question. And as Eli was saying, try to click on that button of raise hand, and Eli or David or I will try to call on you. There's still a lot of people here, 126 people, and we don't have to end this immediately. I'm happy to stay at least for another 15 minutes or so. So I'd like people to be able to ask questions, and for people who haven't yet asked questions especially, but Jenya, please ask your question, and then from then on, please, people who have not yet posed a question.
So
Please, Jenya.
thank you again for this evening, for this amazing time. It was so enlightening, and everybody's comments very interesting. I was just struck by the Tiferet, and am I correct that it's identified with Jacob and Moses?
Yes.
So those are the, in my mind, are the two travelers that can go up to the divine and down, and so it's interesting that it's in that central.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting, because Tiferet we've seen as the column or the spine and running from end to end. Mm-hmm. Jacob and Jacob's ladder, ascending and descending. The angels are descending and ascending, but Jacob is dreaming of the ladder.
Kind of going
and
from
Moses.
In a way from malchut or from Shekinah to Ein Sof.
Yeah.
And then you have the Moses receiving the commandments and traveling up Sinai and down Sinai.
That's right. Moses is also identified with bina because he attained such a high level. In general, the biblical heroes are from Chesed on down, but Moses and Leah are sometimes linked with bina. Yes, Peter D. Raised his hand.
Yes.
Please.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this so much. I've known from what I've studied that the malchut represents Shekhinah represents the daughter. So you have Abba Va'ima, which is the father and the mother in the center column. Then you have Tiferet, the son, and then the daughter. So it's a representation of the family, as above, so below, the spiritual family and the physical family.
Yes.
So, yeah, and since you mentioned that, and I know that we have a relationship with the Creator, God, because we have to bring forth that knowledge or that presence, that we affect that upper world at some degree. So what I'm getting at is that now we're coming to a time where we're trying to redefine this idea of the physical family, and I'm just wondering in how this would affect this whole system, and would it affect it in any way, whether it be not to define it as positive or negative, but which in general how we affect that, since we're trying to in this world trying to redefine this idea of this family that's represented in this tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good to talk here a little bit about the family dynamics in the sefirot. This is, on the one hand, a divine organism, so it's one divine being, but an androgynous being, masculine and feminine, reflecting the androgynous human being. You remember, of course, the story of Adam and Eve, and Adam and Chava are really one being to begin with, and Eve is created from Adam's rib, but the Hebrew word for rib, tsela, can also be translated side, not rib. In that sense, Adam is on one side masculine, on the other side feminine. So there's an androgynous quality right at the beginning of Adam and Eve, and the human being created in the divine image. God is also masculine and feminine. So the sefirot are a single organism, but then when the Zohar talks about the interaction, the dynamics in the divine realm, there you have really a whole family structure. Chochmah, the father, Bina, the mother. Bina gives birth to the 7 children, the 7 lower sefirot, most prominently to the son, S-O-N, Tiferet, and the daughter, malchut or Shekhinah. So Tiferet and malchut are son and daughter, but from another perspective, they are husband and wife. Okay, so they are a masculine couple in that sense. And what the human being does here below affects the divine harmony, affects the divine family. That divine couple cannot unite unless it is stimulated by human virtue. If we act ethically, if we act righteously, then we promote the divine romance. What I would say is that every mitzvah is an aphrodisiac. Every good deed stimulates the divine romance. So you have that single family, but also a courtship, a romance going on there, and that's very rich. Eli, maybe you could call on a few of the people whose hands are
Yeah,
raised.
I think Gabriel had raised his hand first. Gabriel, feel free
Great.
to mute your
Thank
microphone
you.
if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, just curious about the word ani, me or I.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is very central, I know, for Eastern, spiritual seeking. Just curious about how the Zohar.
Yeah, it's a very rich term here. So we mentioned if you could mute everybody, mute their microphone. Great. Could everyone mute their microphone, please? The bottom left of your screen, just click that mute button. That way we won't have the feedback. We spoke about this word ayin at the top of the spherotic ladder, Keter being ayin, spelled Aleph Yud Nun. Someone's microphone is still unmuted. If you could please mute it. Thank you. If you don't know how to mute, look at the bottom left of your screen and click that little microphone. Only click it if it says mute.
John, I think this is coming from you. I clicked the button and then I think you're unclicking it. Could you please click the button? Thanks. Thank you.
Great. So ayin is keter, that nothingness. Malchut, the last of the 10 sefirot, is sometimes called ani. The term you just mentioned, the English word for capital I, meaning me, identity. The Hebrew word is ani, aleph nun yud. So on the one hand, that is the culmination of this entire process. God flows through all the sefirot, the emanation pours forth, and that entire process is God revealing himself. You might say it's God finally saying, I am. When we reach Shekhinah, God has now said, Ani, I am. The whole process of that emanation is God declaring himself. Now it also represents the human being saying, I am. So human identity, human ego. What is the goal of mysticism? Almost all mystics speak about the self dissolving into God. And that works perfectly here. There are finally Hasidic authors who come out and say it. You should take your ani, your I, your identity, Aleph Nun Yud, and switch around the Nun and the Yud. Turn ani into ayin. Turn the I, capital I, into the no thingness. So that mystical melting into the one, discovering that you're part of something greater, that you're not ultimately separate from the divine. That spiritual discovery, that spiritual journey is being hinted at by the fact that those two opposite poles, ayin at the top, ani at the bottom, are the same letters, and one can be transformed into the other.
Awesome, thank you.
I think Ma'ayana is next. If you'd like to unmute your microphone, please feel free.
There. Okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this evening. It's wonderful.
Great.
I was wondering specifically about bina, I'll get it out. Leah being the supernal mother, and the fact
Yes.
that the remaining 7 sefirot devolved from bina, and the fact that Leah had 6 sons and a daughter. Is there any correlation between the sefirot and Leah's children?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, as I recall, Leah. Oh, yeah, you're right, because the handmaidens contribute themselves. Yeah, that may be why the Zohar assigns Leah to Bina. So there's 6 lower sefirot and her 6 sons, and Shekhinah would be the daughter. That could very well be. And malchut and yesod. Someone asked before about how could Joseph be above Rachel, but at least you have Joseph right next to Rachel. So Rachel is connected with Yosef, and Leah with a multitude of children. That may very well have contributed to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
I believe Lisa Ann has had a question.
Okay, hi, it's me, it's Akiva. Hi,
Akiva.
I wanted to thank you. It's wonderful to see you. And I just wanted to ask you, for those of us who maybe want to pray for you, what's your Hebrew name?
Daniel Hanan. Thank you.
Delia?
I know Netzach and Hod is also compared to the kidneys. What's your understanding of that? Or is that too big a question?
Yeah. Netzach and Hod are unusual sefirot. Sometimes they're compared to the kidneys, and in rabbinic literature, the kidneys are the seat of the emotions. So Netzach and Hod would be God's emotions pouring forth. At the top of the sefirot, you have more, intellectual qualities, chokhmah and bina. Chesed, love, and gevurah, fear, are certainly emotions. And in a sense, Netzach and Hod are minor versions of Chesed and gevurah. So that polarity of Netzach and Hod, right and left, it repeats. It's similar to Chesed and gevurah. So those four sefirot would all be emotional. At other points, Netzach and Hod are seen as two testicles. So Netzach Hod Yesod altogether would be male sexual organs. And their most prominent role in the Zohar is the source of prophecy. They are seen as the source of Nivuah, Netzach and Hod.
Thank you.
I don't think anybody has their hand raised right now. There's a couple of notes in the chat
Right.
at the bottom here.
Yeah. I can take a look at some of those. Is prophecy related to the harnessing of the emotions? Yeah, if prophecy is related to Netzach and Hod in particular, you could say that. In a sense, what's going on there is that the stream of emanation, is flowing down from Keter through the Sefirot. It basically is all heading to Shekhinah. This is sometimes pictured as rivers flowing into the sea. So the rivers are streaming down toward the sea, and then anybody who attains the rung of Shekhinah is gifted with that flow of emanation. So prophecy would simply be the overflow of the divine Shefa, the overflow of emanation. And that goes back to Maimonides. Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher, describes prophecy as the divine intellect overflowing and reaching the human intellect. Okay, maybe we'll just do another 2 or 3 chatted questions, and then we'll take a break till next week. Anyone else? Maybe a more general question about Zohar or about Kabbalah?
Dan?
Yes, please.
Mel?
Hi.
Hi. I don't know whether you can see me or not.
Yeah, I can see you.
I had a question about movement, physical movement, and how that related. You rarely, I haven't seen anything about it yet, but does physical movement relate to Zoharic understanding of physical, of the
Sefirot?
The Sefirot.
Yeah, it's a good question. The Zohar is a very dynamic text, and it's really describing God as a dynamic figure, right? God is not static being, but dynamic becoming. Everything is flow and movement. The limbs are interacting. There's sexual union and the passion of that. A lot of the Zohar's description is about the divine energy bubbling up from the source, from ayin. And then on a more earthly plane, it's interesting, the Zohar very rarely talks about studying in a room. You don't sit and study, you walk on the way. It's very often Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yossi were walking on the way. One said to the other, why don't we discuss Torah while we're walking? Or here's a beautiful field. Let's sit in the field for a moment and we'll crown these trees with words of Torah. So being in nature and moving, walking, traveling, journeying, that is a constant theme in the Zohar. They're traveling to see Rabbi Shimon. They're traveling through mountains, through beautiful territory or dangerous territory. A lot of the Zohar is set in that narrative framework of moving and traveling. In terms of physical movement itself, moving the limbs, you have that occasionally in rabbinic literature. You have the Bible saying, may all my bones say, Kol atzmotai tomarna mi chamocham. May all my bones say, who is like you. And the rabbis say, you haven't really prayed successfully until all the vertebrae in your back crack. I don't mean crack, break, but until you have to be moving to be spiritual.
So there is a connection to, say, yoga.
In terms of yoga, there are certain parallels between specific chakras and specific sefirot. The crown chakra is the highest chakra, and the crown here is the first keter, foundation or yesod being the root or the base of the spine of the human body, and the energy traveling up the spine. And even though there's 7 chakras and 10 sefirot, if you look at the chart, there are actually 7 levels of sefirot. So that 7 is parallel. So you can find parallels there.
Thank you.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Hello, Daniel. Hello, Professor. How are you?
Good.
The number 3 appears frequently. So if the masculine or the right column, it has the numerical value of 1, the feminine left column has the numerical value of 1. Does that mean they create center column, which means 1 plus 1 really equals 3? And how does the number 3 really relate in the Zohar?
Yeah, well, I would say, 1 and 3 are certainly very central here. If you look at the diagram of the sefirot, you really see 3 triads, right? Keter, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and then everything culminating in Shekhinah. Someone put in a chat several points during this session about Da'at, right? That hidden sefirah of Da'at. Da'at would also be part of a triad. Then it would be Chochma, Bina, Da'at, which of course is the origin of the term Chabad. Chabad Hasidism takes its name from 3 of the sefirot, Chochma, Bina, Da'at. We haven't said anything about Da'at, and Da'at is really a hidden sefirah. The problem is if you bring Da'at in, then Keter is really out of the picture because you can only have 10 sefirot. There have to be 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11, as it says in Sefer Yetzirah. So if Da'at is there, then Keter is really moved up, and you could say identified with Ein Sof. So 3 is very important, that triadic structure, and the 3 becoming 1 is very important because this multiplicity is only apparent. That sounds a little bit, reminds one of the Trinitarian formulation of 3 being 1. And again, the Zohar would be battling against Christianity, polemicizing against the Trinity, and yet it looks here like you have a kind of triadic structure. In fact, one critic of the Kabbalah, Abraham Abulafia himself, was a Kabbalist, but he has a critique of the Sefirot where he says it looks like this is worse than the Trinity. They have 3 and we have 10. But of course, the Zohar insists the Chol Achad, all is one. The unity behind the apparent multiplicity is a central message in the Zohar. So what appears to be 2 or multiple is 1, and the 3 specifically are 1.
Isn't the Mogen David a 3-pointed star pointing upward and a 3-pointed star pointed downward, overlaid on top of each other?
Yeah, there you have 2 triads, and here we have 3 triads. So there's a lot of theorizing about the origins of Magen David. the Star of David, and no one knows exactly what that refers to, but there you have triads there and triads here. I saw a chat that just popped up about analytically, and was that I'm used to reading analytically. Any advice on how to read more poetically? Yeah, I think it's good to go back and forth, I think, between poetic reading and analytic reading. One way to help you read poetically is simply to pause, to stop. I would read a line or read a paragraph without the notes. Read a line or read a paragraph and just sit with that line, sit with that paragraph to meditate, to bring some meditation into your study, some moments of silence, and then to allow for the analysis. I don't want to reject the analysis, but we certainly want to leave room for the silence and the spaciousness and the poetry. Maybe we'll do one more question, and then we will take a break till next week. But I expect and I hope that we'll continue during the week with a Facebook group. Many of you have joined that already, Zohar Zoom, and you just go to it and ask to join, and I will let you in as soon as I see it. Please, Bina has a question.
Hi, thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Great.
The process that you just described, as far as first sitting with the material and then going into the analyzing, where in this process would be the right time to look at whatever Torah is quoted and find the pshat of that so that I can figure out how it relates to what Zohar is trying to tell me?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked that, and that's really important for our method here. I think it's really almost impossible to dive right into Zohar, and some people think that it's dangerous to do what we're doing. I think the transition really has to be from Torah to Midrash to Zohar. And a lot of what we're going to do, we only did a little bit of it tonight, but a lot of what we're going to do is to use the Zohar to enable us to see that whole development from the Bible itself, from Torah, to how the rabbis expand the meaning of Torah through Midrash, and then seeing Zohar as the next step. And that way you're not taking such a leap. You're not leaping right from your everyday consciousness to Zohar. You're looking at the pasuk, at the verse. You're seeing how the rabbis open up that verse, and then you're ready to see how the Zohar goes a little deeper, a little further. So if you look closely at my commentary, a lot of what I do is exactly what you're describing, to say, what does the Bible mean? How do the rabbis expand the meaning? And then where does the Zohar take us from there? And that's really I think that's a wonderful thing to conclude on tonight, because that really should be our approach. That should be our strategy. That should be our method, not to focus on Zohar in and of itself, but to see it as part of the process of the unfolding of Torah, how Torah expands in meaning. That's really how the Zohar became accepted as such a holy book, as HaZohar HaKadosh, because it's not an independent book, right? It's a holy book because it opens up the Torah. It's the deepest meaning of the Torah for so many Jews, and we'll see so many examples of how it does that. So why don't we stop here, and we'll end this first meeting. It was wonderful to begin like this, and I think we found a good organic way. Eli was saying this would happen organically. I'm sure some of you had questions that were not answered, but with the chatting and calling on people and then leaving time for actual faces and voices to be heard, I think we'll be able to discover a lot and learn from each other. And please, let's make use of the Facebook group too. So great beginning, and we'll continue soon. Laila Tov.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Laila Tov.